the government calls it the Strong Borders Act. I would say it's the Strong Surveillance Act. You don't need to violate the right of Canadians to use cash in order to protect people. Government does not need the names and email addresses and IP addresses of millions of people in order to fight crime, because that can already be done. The tools are there. I was called to the bar in 1999, and my practice in law has been in constitutional law. And I head up a nonprofit group called the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. We have been in the trenches fighting for the freedoms of expression, association, conscience, the right of parents to protect their children from transgender ideology, freedom of movement, freedom of travel. I've got a team of 10 lawyers all across Canada taking on dozens of cases. We sued governments all over Canada over their lockdowns and mandatory vaccination policies.
We're not going to address the immigration. We're not going to address what the bill claims to do, because there's going to be thousands of people creating content and lawyers creating content about how awesome this bill is. We really wanted to speak about the problematics that we've seen in this bill, especially when it comes to 4 different things. And 3 of them you spoke about briefly in a video that you guys released yesterday on X, which are electronic service provider. We want to talk about money over 10K. We want to address the new powers that potentially Canada Post could obtain by opening up our mail. And there's the one that she did not talk about, which I'm going to bring a correlation later on as to why I think it's important to talk about it. The exportation portion of the bill, we saw a few things in there where like, okay, hold on here. This is very, very problematic. So even if you haven't read it as in detail as we have, we still want to have just your legal opinion as to, are we on crack here? There's a lot of doors that are being opened with this bill that I don't like where this potentially could go.
Well, I agree. Which one do you want to start with?
I'm a sales engineer by trade. I was in telecommunication field for years, working for Rogers, working for Videotron, selling massive telecommunication services to some of the biggest entities in North America. So the electronic service provider, when I read this week, I'm like, oh, no. I know where they're going with this. So there's a few things, and I know you talked about this, so I'm hoping that you're aware of what I'm referring to. But let me ask you this. Electronic service provider. It sounds like nothing just for in layman's term for the average person. They might not understand what this means, but correct me if I'm wrong here, because the term we used to use in my field was internet service provider. So whoever the Videotron, the Bell, the TELUS of this world, those companies would sometimes be contacted by the RCMP, for example, to say, hey, we have a warrant for this specific guy. We see that he's on your network. We believe that he's a pedophile. We believe that he's sharing stuff that should not be shared. Can you please provide me with some information regarding this? But this bill is mentioning electronic service providers, which this is where I want to have your opinion. Because in my world, what this means is that it could encompass internet services, it could encompass social media platform, it could encompass cell phone manufacturers, car manufacturers. It could literally encompass anything that has an electronic device that can be remotely accessed, like your smart TVs, your smart refrigerator, your smart everything, your camera system, your car. So does the word electronic scare you?
Well, everything is electronic. And one of the commentators, I think it could have been Michael Geist at the University of Ottawa, he said that there's a pretty strong, clear Supreme Court of Canada ruling about the right to privacy. And people have a privacy right in terms of which internet companies that they are using. And so, if let's say Netflix or Amazon Prime has a list with thousands or millions of subscribers. It's confidential when you purchase something. The same way that it's confidential if you donate money to a charity. The only people that should know is the charity receiving the money, and so we have a privacy interest. And what Bill C-2 does is it requires electronic service providers to organize their data in such a way that it can be easily turned over to the government, and the government wants to have access to the names of the subscribers and their IP addresses, which is getting close to where they live. Maybe not a specific street address, but where is your IP server located? So even you referred to how you had previous experiences. The RCMP would contact the company that you worked for, and they said, we've got one particular individual that we've got some information suggesting he's trafficking child pornography. That is the way law enforcement is supposed to work. It should be possible for the police to contact a company and say, look, we want information about one individual, and they should have to get a search warrant or a court order. What is totally wrong is this whole attitude that the government is entitled to know. A government that knows everything about you is a government that can take everything from you. This is the problem. We don't want to be in a situation where governments have this knowledge of who is subscribing to which companies and which IP addresses are they using. Just because government is a double-edged sword. Government can be a good thing, protect us, fight crime, law enforcement, the police, protect our borders, national defense to protect against foreign enemies. Government can be a force for good, but government can be a force for evil as well. And history teaches us that. So you don't want to give government massive amounts of information about which Canadians are subscribing to which services. So that's the problem, is government acquiring information that it doesn't need.
One of the comments that I got this week when we spoke about this, and this is exactly where my mind went. Do you see Bill C-2 as almost a Patriot Act that the Americans passed like 20-ish years ago? Because as I was reading it, I was sitting outside with a cigar, and I apologize for your ears, but I swear a lot. I'm like, what the fuck is this shit? This sounds like the Patriot Act that Bush passed 20-ish years ago that basically gave birth to the NSA in the US. This is how I saw it. Does that ring true to you, or am I? Because there's a tinfoil hat right behind me for a reason. I'm a conspiracy theorist first and foremost. Do you think I should put my tinfoil hat on, or do you think that it might be very close to the Patriot Act, or the intent is very close?
No, you don't need a tinfoil hat. When you see even the deceptive language, it's supposed to be about border security. There's an awful lot of content here that has nothing to do with the border. I think it should be called, the government calls it the Strong Borders Act. I would say it's the Strong Surveillance Act. You don't need to violate the right of Canadians to use cash, even if you could say, well, it's only a minimal violation because we're only preventing you from using more than $10,000 of cash. But still, you don't need to violate the right to use cash in order to protect people. Government does not need the names and email addresses and IP addresses of millions of people in order to fight crime, because that can already be done. The tools are there. The police can go to court and get a warrant that applies to one individual, and then they can break into his home without a warrant. They can watch his emails, they can listen to his phone calls, they can do all kinds of things, but it's restricted because they have to go to court to get a warrant. So this is, if this was only about the borders, and if we were talking only about the refugee claimant process, immigration policies, then you could say, well, it's the Strong Borders Act. But going after, violating the privacy rights of Canadians and attacking our right to use cash, and being able to intercept the mail, that has nothing to do with borders at all. So it's very deceptive language. In terms of the Patreon Act, I confess I did not look at that legislation closely 20 years ago, but certainly when you have a crisis, whether it's a real crisis or a manufactured crisis, politicians use that to expand their powers.
Like they say, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if you give the government a hammer, they're going to use it. And that's actually a great segue to my next question, which is about cash, and that aspect of the bill. Before I do, I just wanted to just quickly point out there's a few people here who have some nice things to say. Leah says the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom rocks. And our other regular here, Wise Guy, says he's a regular contributor twice a year to the Justice Center. So just thought you might like to see that.
He's pleasantly surprised.
Pleasantly surprised.
Just for you, Wise Guy. We have John here just for you.
Yes, exactly. So, and actually, if you are curious, you can see the comments from the audience down in the bottom right-hand corner. So if you did see anything there that you did want to address specifically, by all means, feel free to just speak up about that. But as you were talking about cash, so I read a piece you did in the Western Standard the other day, an opinion piece, when I was preparing for this, and that's kind of the part that really jumped out at me, and why I want to talk about this specifically. You said the part that I really thought was kind of really jumped out was where you said restricting the use of cash is a dangerous step towards tyranny and totalitarianism. And I thought that, I never really thought about it like that before. I know that when we had done our initial deep dive into the bill there the other day, we had mentioned the cash thing, the $10,000 thing. And, we were kind of like, well, that's kind of been around for a while. I think we thought it was more towards crossing the border with that kind of money. And I think we were like, okay, well, that makes a little bit of sense. You don't maybe need more than 10K in cash across the border. But as I was reading your piece, it seems that this is just a blanket ban on any transactions above 10K. So no, you can't give to charity. You can't buy a car. Or at the very least, if you do, you're going to have to get permission. And of course, it's probably going to put you on a list somewhere, which is very, that in itself is concerning. As I was reading it, it sort of seemed to me that like this bill is almost a double-edged sword here, where on the one hand, they're severely restricting our ability to interact with the real economy by restricting our ability to use cash and forcing us into the digital sphere. And then at the other end, they're dropping the hammer in the digital sphere. It almost seems like a classic pincher movement. So I was wondering if you could just sort of dig into that a little bit and explain how this is different from the existing restrictions on cash, and what are some potential maybe obviously there's some obvious downsides, but how you see it as a civil liberty lawyer, where you see the red flags are really jumping out at you here.
Well, cash protects our privacy and our autonomy. So I live in Calgary. If I'm using cash, I can go to a gas station and spend $50 cash to fill up my car with gas. I can drive to Edmonton, 3 hours to the north, and I can have lunch in Edmonton and spend a few hours there, or spend 2 or 3 days there, use cash, come back to Calgary again. If I'm using cash, nobody knows that I filled up my car with gas in Calgary on a Tuesday morning. There's no records of that. If I use cash to pay for, meals in Edmonton at restaurants, nobody knows that I went to Edmonton, which restaurants I went to at what time. There's just no records. And so it gives us a confidentiality and an anonymity. Now, freedom-loving politicians are fine with that. It's like, well, I don't want to know where people are going, where they went, when they went there, what they bought, when they bought it, where they bought it. Freedom-loving politicians who actually respect our charter rights are fine with this anonymity. And their attitude is the only time that the government has a right to know is if you are, trafficking child pornography or you're engaging in criminal activity. Well, then you kind of give up your privacy rights and you could be put under surveillance on a case-by-case basis individually. So, the police have to go to court and get a warrant for surveillance if they want to do surveillance on an individual or on a group. Now, this is the first time in history that using cash can be a criminal offense if it's an amount larger than 10,000, and if it's given to a charity or a professional or a business. So this is a milestone. Once, if this bill passes and it's in the criminal code that it's a criminal code offense to buy something for more than 10,000, and that applies also if it's broken down into multiple donations. So if somebody wanted to donate $1,000 cash to the Justice Center once a month, by November they would be breaking the law because they would have exceeded 10,000. Now we're not getting $10,000 donations by cash, but that's not really the point. I mean, the point is good citizens who are not committing crimes. If they want to use cash, they should be able to use cash. And the other thing is, once this is in the criminal code, if it gets there, the government can then very easily say, well, now the limit's, it's not 10,000, it's 5,000. And then the limit's 1,000. And next thing you know, cash purchases of more than $100 are illegal. So you can still go, maybe a farmer's market or a garage sale, you can still use cash. But if you're going to spend more than $100, it's got to be on a credit card where there's a record. And so cash is freedom from government surveillance, freedom from bank surveillance, freedom from credit card surveillance.
Yeah, and I mean that's a great point, that the sort of the slippery slope argument, because as you say, most of us don't deal with $10,000 in cash, but many of us do in 1,000 or 500, and even if maybe in this exact moment it's hard to imagine, or it's not even that hard, a government who might be just purely tyrannical, who it's a life and death issue to keep that kind of information secret from them. We all know that throughout history, governments change, and there might come a day when we really regret putting that kind of a law in place. I just have one quick follow-up question regarding your article, because you had mentioned specifically that this bill is quite similar to one in Quebec that passed in March 2024. I believe it's called Bill 54, that allows the police to assume any person carrying $2,000 or more in cash is connected to illegal activity. Assume that. That is insane to me. I was just wondering if I mean, this is the first I've heard of it. Have there been any abuses of civil rights or charter rights that has happened because of that law yet, or is that something that you're following up on, and is that something that you can see being, becoming the law of the land at some point? Is that the direction you think this is going?
Well, thus far, nobody has approached the Justice Center from Quebec in a situation where their $2,000 were confiscated from police. However, just because nobody's approached us to ask for legal help, I mean, a lot of people don't even know that we exist. So I'm not aware of cases where it's been abused. However, my lack of awareness doesn't mean that it's not being abused. It could have been dozens of times or hundreds of times that police have seized money. And then you have a reverse onus. As a citizen, you have to go to court. You probably have to hire a lawyer. You have to spend hundreds of dollars, and you have to prove that the $2,000 was because you had maybe been, going door to door fundraising for a charity. $2,000 is not a huge amount, right? So I mean, so the reverse onus is bad. I mean, the onus should be on the government to have to prove that the $2,000 was from criminal activity. That's been our tradition for centuries to protect citizens. The government has to prove that you're guilty. A citizen should never have to go to court to prove his innocence.
Because as per the criminal law, I am supposed to be considered non-guilty. I'm supposed to be considered innocent, and it is the job of the criminal court to prove without reasonable doubt that I did what they accuse me of doing. So they stop laws, and I live in Montreal. Like, I spend half my time in Canada, half my time in the US, but I didn't even know this existed. This is mind-blowing to me. I was looking at it as we're talking, but it's absolutely right. There's no case. I couldn't find a case of this happening, but the fact that it's possible, and God knows that the police officers in Quebec are some of the worst police officers. Like, those guys are terrible, and I'm talking to you as a Frenchie. So I know. And there's a couple of comments I wanted to address. Hopefully you can give your opinion on them, but Detective Gaines said that your phone knows where you're traveling. You know what, Detective Gaines? Yes, but during COVID, because I don't have the whoop whoop, I was supposed to stay home, but I lived in the woods. So you know what I did? I take that phone, I left it at home, and I bought a flip phone an old school flip phone, just in case I needed to call somebody that you could not track. And guess what? I was using money.
That's crazy that you even needed to do that.
But I had an older phone that is not GPS tracked. I had an old school phone that you can track, and I was using cash. This is my right. This is my right as a citizen to not be tracked. Because it always comes down to this, and John, I think you probably hear that all the time, but what do you have to worry about if you're not breaking the law? You shouldn't worry about the government looking at everything you do. Oh, see,
That's the classic.
Well, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And there are very few people who, whether they're an elected politician or whether they're unelected, bureaucrat, civil servant, or appointed to some position of authority, there are very few people who are able to resist that temptation to use that power. There's a friend of mine, Theo Fleury, a hockey player you're probably familiar with, played with the Flames for a long time. And he's spoken very publicly about his addictions with alcohol and drugs. He claims that the most addictive substance is power. And I think we saw it during lockdowns. I think that, you're go to a news conference and declare the law for the whole province as to the extent to which people are going to be locked up. And then 2 weeks later, you say, well, you have a little bit more freedom now. Now you can meet with, 3 friends instead of one. Now you can have two people over to your house instead of one. It's a, it's just, it's a big power trip. And we have to learn from history. When you see people, the extreme examples, Pol Pot, genocide of 30%, 40% of the population of Cambodia under the communists. We see tens of millions killed in Mao's communist China. We see tens of millions killed in the Soviet Union under Stalin and other leaders. During World War II, you've got the Germany under Hitler, and the National Socialists have occupied most of Europe. Millions, genocide. Its power, and even if there had never been any genocide, you look at the behavior of, the military junta in Argentina, with something like 30,000 people, or maybe it was 3,000, bad enough, disappearing, people being tortured and murdered. And so this is why we need restraints on government. Government can do good things for us, absolutely. I'm not an anarchist. I think it's fine to have a government. But government's like fire or like electricity. You want to have it under control. You want it to be your servant, not your master. This is why it's dangerous to lose the right to use cash, or to have governments gaining information about millions of people and which electronic service providers that they're using.
There's a great question I wanted to bring up from Sasquatch. He's asking, John, do you think the government will use this bill to squash the separation movement in Alberta? I assume they could spy on anyone and punish them financially. Just so you know, John, we have some of the smartest commenters and listeners on the planet. Some of the guys that we have are guys and women, because our women are smart too. But do you think that's a possibility? That you think they could do that? Because technically they could, but what do you think about it?
Maybe that's why they're doing this.
It wouldn't surprise. Sometimes people abuse their power. The example we saw was in the October crisis in Quebec in 1970, where Pierre Elliott Trudeau used the War Measures Act. It was basically a crackdown on the Quebec separatist movement, and they arrested hundreds of people who had no connection to terrorist activities, but they were peacefully active in Quebec separatism, and they were arrested and locked up in jail. And he didn't need to use the War Measures Act. He could have sent soldiers into the streets of Montreal without using the War Measures Act, but it was a power play because he hated the Pierre Elliott Trudeau hated the Quebec separatist movement so much that he would abuse the state power. He took advantage of the crisis. There was a crisis. Pierre Laporte had been a cabinet minister, had been kidnapped and was later murdered. And then there was James Cross, a British official, was kidnapped. So there was a crisis, and he used the crisis to use state power to really, for political purposes, to crack down on
Legitimate
peaceful
political activity.
his political opponents. And so, I don't want to speculate about what might happen, but I would certainly say that it's within the realm of the possible that people would abuse their authority to, take illegal actions against Alberta separatists or any other political opponents.
It opens the door, right? That this is all I'm hearing is that it gives them the power to do it. You can't assume automatically that they would, but they definitely would have the power to do it if they chose to.
And this is the naivete that I find frustrating, is that there are some people who would say, well, look, if the government wants to put a camera in my living room just to make sure I'm not doing anything bad, I don't have anything to worry about because I'm not doing anything bad. I'm not beating my wife. I'm not I'm not running a prostitution ring. I'm not manufacturing fentanyl. So it's okay for the government to have a camera in my living room because I'm not doing anything wrong. I have nothing to fear. That is an extreme naivete vis-a-vis government. What do you think government does when it has all of that information? They're gonna use it, right? And again, the government doesn't need that for good law enforcement. We've had in Canada for 157 years, we've had, compared to other countries, we've had peace, prosperity, low crime, political stability. The government doesn't need to intercept our mail in order to keep us safe.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. Those people, I think, who say, "Well, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not manufacturing fentanyl." Well, yeah, that's fine. But what about when the government decides that your political opinions are what's wrong, or they're going to crack down on hate speech, and they determine hate speech is if you don't believe that men can give birth, or you think that women can't have a penis. So it's a very slippery slope when we get down here. And I think your analogy with the FLQ crisis was great because, of course, the kidnapping of the cabinet minister there is a criminal act. And it was committed by people who were associated with a political movement. But that does not mean the political movement itself was fundamentally illegitimate. And that is absolutely the way that they cracked down on it. So I think we do need to be aware of history here.
You don't need to look that far, freedom truckers.
No.
Like, not that I
No.
don't want to open that can of worm, but we're talking 2 years ago. So we don't have to look back that far to see that they will take advantage of it.
It was like a third world regime. The government used violence. You had the police with batons coming out there. A lady trampled and injured with a horse walking over her. Violence used against people who had been peaceful. I mean, there can be a time and a place where it might be necessary for the police to use violence. I'm not saying they can never do that, but this was a crackdown on a protest and a failure to use existing law enforcement, like placing tickets on on the trucks that were illegally parked, although they have been directed to park there by police. But put tickets on trucks and cars that are illegally parked. If they don't move, you tow them away. There's all kinds of legal, ordinary law enforcement that could have been used to make that protest more manageable. I understand it caused inconvenience to people who lived in Ottawa. They didn't use the ordinary law enforcement at all, and instead they declared an Emergencies Act. The Justice Centre was involved in that court case where the judge ruled that the federal government acted illegally when using the Emergencies Act. So it was good. We got a court ruling that gave the federal government a slap in the face.
Yeah, that's so. In other words, the government used a sledgehammer when they could have used a scalpel, which is essentially probably one of the bigger fears of people who are involved in civil rights battles. I did want to shift a little bit to the male aspect of this bill. Because we did do a deep dive, but as you know, it's heavily written in legalese and it's probably intentionally difficult to read for laymen. So we're trying to sort of read the tea leaves and pick and choose, but it appears to us as we were reading it that the government has essentially carte blanche powers to open your mail based on, you know, the bill is littered with words like good faith, which is obviously extremely ambiguous, and how can you disprove it, right? You can't disprove someone good faith. Any officer can say, hey, it's in my good faith that I believe there's something illegal about this package, and even if there's not, he can say, I don't know what to tell you. I was in good faith. So I just want to know, like, specifically, what does this do, or what powers does this give law enforcement to open our mail without even informing us, without a warrant? And how is it different from the existing requirements that they would have to do to access this kind of material?
Well, the starting point is the current powers that they have. And governments sometimes they ask for more power when they already have the powers in place. According to Blacklock's reporter, what police have already been doing for years is if they suspect, because they got tipped off, they got a tip from somebody, however they got their information. If police suspect that somebody is getting shipments of child pornography or fentanyl or explosives or bombs or whatever, police have been known to pose as couriers or to post as mailmen, and then they take the package and knock on the door. And the law enforcement is good if it's targeted at individuals where there's a suspicion, on reasonable grounds that they're involved in criminal activity. If it's narrowly targeted that way, the police already have the power to be involved with Canada Post and maybe get information about, one individual living at one address. And so police already have that power. They don't have a broad power to intercept mail. Canada Post does not have the power to open mail. So this is something people understood 157 years ago when Canada was founded, and even prior. If I write a letter to Nico in Montreal, it's nobody else's business what's in there. It's private. It's a message from me to him. Nobody should have the right to open that unless they have reasonable grounds for suspecting that I'm writing down the secret code to unleashing a bomb, or whatever, something criminal.
I also noticed in that bill there was something about immunity for these either Canada Post or just companies for giving your information, so that otherwise it can't later on be accused of violating your civil rights. Is that new, or is that something that's typically, is that just something that's done in these sorts of bills?
I regret I can't answer that. I haven't looked at that provision.
Maybe I can put a bit of specificity to this. They're allowing public servant to look at the mail, for example, to go. They're changing the definition of warrant and who can have it from police officer to public servant. So basically somebody that works for the government that is not a police officer. But what he's referring to is in good faith. They've put in good faith a few times within the bill itself, as in, we're doing this in the preliminary steps of an investigation in good faith. Like we're doing it just like the Emergency Act in Quebec has, that that a government that enforces an emergency act cannot be held, has immunity against whatever the consequences are their actions because they did it in good faith. I believe that that's what you're referring to, the good faith part. Is that something that is normally in law? Because I can't say that I've ever seen that before in a bill where, to me, it translates to trust me, bro. That's what the translation of in good faith sounds to me.
Most people, good faith is sincerity. It's acting with good intentions. Most people act in good faith most of the time. It's a very low standard. I mean, it's better than acting in bad faith, right? So malicious, for example, if you're acting in good faith, you're not malicious. You have the best of intentions. You're not seeking to inflict harm. But it's a very low standard. The standard of doing things based on reasonable and probable grounds, especially if it's reasonable and probable, that means that police can only go to court and apply for a search warrant, not just if in good faith they believe that you've got child pornography at your home, but it has to be reasonable and probable grounds that you have child pornography at your home. So the standard that way is that the police would need to have reports from people that suggest that, Mark Smith, living at 1234 Main Street, has child pornography on his computer in his house. They actually have some evidence, and then they can go to court and they can say, we have reasonable and probable grounds, and so we want a search warrant. And they can get the search warrant and they can bust into the guy's home without a warrant when he's least expecting it, and grab his computer before he can delete his files, etc. So that's a high standard, reasonable and probable grounds. Acting in good faith is, again, it's better than malicious, but it's a very low standard, authorizes anybody to do anything almost.
You couldn't disprove that someone was not acting in good faith. All they have to do is say, I was, and you just have to take their word for it.
It's a low standard. Yeah. There's a lot of, I was doing the best I could under the circumstances. I was trying to do my best. I was trying to do what was right. So again, it's a good thing, right? We want everybody to act in good faith. It's not a bad thing. But in terms of a legal standard for authorizing the violation of privacy, that's way too low of a legal standard.
I know that I was told that you need to leave in 2 minutes. I wish I will take every single minute. If you want to stay longer and cancel everything else, we have plenty of questions for you. But I'm going to try to finish with an easy one. And this came up to me this morning when I'm a firearms owner, just so you know. So I know the legal system in Canada. But I was reading this morning, as per the Toronto police, 88% of the firearms they seized that were used in crimes came from the US. In this bill about securing our border, firearms is not mentioned once. Do you think that makes sense?
I don't know. I'm not too familiar with the firearms regulations, although I disagree with the whole attitude of government seems to be that we can somehow reduce crime by imposing more and more rules and regulations on law-abiding citizens who own firearms. It's just stupid. You don't crack down on crime by putting more bureaucracy, more rules, more regulations on law-abiding people. Maybe they're saving the firearms stuff for another day. Hopefully not. I think it's so misguided to devote all these resources to placing more burdens on 6 million or whatever number millions of Canadian firearms owners.
What I meant to say, maybe my question wasn't clear, is if the Toronto Police, arguably the biggest police service in Canada outside of the RCMP, is saying that 88% of firearms are coming from the US, like illegal firearms are coming from the US, shouldn't firearm be a priority to be blocked at our borders? Shouldn't this be part of the bill, as in we are trying to go after this? Because they name fentanyl, but they don't talk about firearms yet.
You make a valid point. I couldn't tell you. I can't read into these people's minds, but yeah, it does. It's interesting, as you mentioned, that they're not referencing firearms, only fentanyl. Perhaps they feel that they don't need changes to current laws to catch more of these guns coming into Canada from the U.S.
How much more time do we have you on? Because I'm trying to be cognizant of your time. I know that you're supposed to be done at literally a minute ago, but there is one topic I wanted to address. If you have the time, I would love to bring it with.
Well, let's go for 4 more minutes. And I neglected to take my power cord, so my battery is slowly dying as well. But let's go another 4 minutes.
If you've got one, Nico, you asked yours a 5 time. I've got a quick one after that I'll ask, but you go ahead first.
One of the things that we noticed when we were going through this bill is that they mention exportation, but within that article of exportation, they start talking about every person who transports or causes to be transported within Canada goods destined for export must, at an officer's request, give the officer free access to any premise or place under the person's control that is attached or formed part at any places where that good was destined to be exported, loaded, unloaded, or stored. So, and right after that, they start talking about warehouses. So, the question that I have for you is twofold. First, what's a warehouse? Because I Googled it, and my first thought of this is okay, hold on. Any good that is meant for the US or that's transported within Canada, now at an officer's request, not under warrant, at an officer's request, must be given free rein to examine where that good was or anything that was under my control, for example. But what I thought about this, I'm like, I was part of the trucker convoy, right? So I'm like, okay, hold on. Are you going after truckers? Because this is what it sounds to me. Because if I'm who transports good? Truckers. Where are their trucks normally stored at night? At their home. Does that mean that because my truck who transported goods that was parked at my house, does that give you access to my house?
Is that a warehouse and officially, like legally?
Like those are my gear, right? Those are my t-shirts. So does that mean that if I have my residential garage where I store my t-shirts, my hoodies, that I have people in the US that I will ship to, does that mean that my garage that is also a warehouse for my small business, does that mean that they have access to my garage? Like, do you see the door that it's happening, that it's opening? Because all I can see with the $10,000 donation limit that could be trickled down to 1,000, for example, transportation, whatever is under that's transported, they get access to without a warrant. My garage as a small business owner, doesn't it feel, is it possible that they're trying to squash a freedom trucker convoy, a second one, or just like it was mentioned earlier by the Alberta movement? Doesn't it open the door for them to be able to make it so difficult for people who are protesting them that they will just shut down any speech that is against them just because people don't want to deal with it, just like what's happening in the UK with Twitter posts online where police is showing up to your house? Because that's what it sounds to me.
Power can be abused in so many different ways. If this sounds like, and did you get a chance to see the definition? Was there something in the definitions section that defined warehouse?
I don't believe there was, because we searched for ours.
I did not see it. You can give me your opinion, and I have the PDF right next to me, and I'll look at it right now.
Look, the problem again is that police should not have the right to inspect warehouses and to request information. It has to be the way it should be, the way it is now. You know, police can make requests. There's some exceptions. For example, if you're caught speeding or the policeman thinks you're speeding, there's a law that says you must show your driver's license to the police officer, right? Obviously, the police officer is not going to have to go to court to get a warrant, to get a court order, to compel you to show him your driver's license. So we have some modest exceptions for practical reasons, right? So if you're driving a car and the provincial law is you must show your registration, driver's license, and insurance to the police officer. If you refuse to do so, it's an offense, etc. So we've got some very practical carve outs. But if it's anything else, like what you have in your warehouse, that the police shouldn't be able to, request, hey, I want to know, I want to know what's in your warehouse. I want information about this. No.
It just says at officer's request, give officer free access.
Give officer free access. Police have no right. They shouldn't, unless it's the actual commission of a crime. That's the other example. You need a search warrant or you need a report. Some woman is getting raped in the warehouse right now.
Sure, of course.
Then you can bust in the door and you don't need a search warrant. Those are the only two exceptions. Police should not be able to just go where they want and get whatever information they want. That's frightening. Whether they use it for or against other freedom convoy or not.
So warehouse is mentioned 5 times within the 140 pages bill, and it's right here. It's all under the same article. Officer access to good. Warehouse. The operator or sufferance warehouse or a bonded warehouse must, at an officer's request, give the officer free access to the warehouse or the premise under the operator's control that is attached or form part of the warehouse and open any package containing of goods destined for export or remove any package.
That means your house, if your house is attached to the garage and your garage is the warehouse, they can access your house too.
Goods destined for export. I mean, that could be anything. I've got I've got a book that I wrote, and if I wanted to mail this to somebody in the United States, I suppose it's destined for export. No, we have to really fight tooth and nail to keep the warrant system in place. We want law enforcement to be able to fight crime, but there have to be restrictions there. If not, we're in deep trouble.